Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our chats with Emily as we are calling our readings through the poetry of Emily Dickinson. We are using the Thomas H. Johnson edition, and we now turn to poem 695, As If the Sea Should Part. Now, this as if is interesting construction. We saw it in 180, we saw it in 414. When we get to the next poem, 696, it will be Acres of Perhaps. Emily loves this construction as if, what is grief, what is sorrow, what is pain. In this poem, we're going to be playing the game of eternity, but the as if will not be at the beginning, but rather at the very end. Now, of course, eternity takes us back to the previous study that we just finished with, 694, the heaven vests for each, where she's continuing to play around with the question of eternity. Now, when this poem was first published, it was published in the London Mercury of February of 1929. In many ways, we are back to two earlier poems. Do you guys remember when we did 550? I cross till I am weary a mountain in my mind, more mountains than a sea, more seas and then a desert find, and my horizon blocks with steady drifting grains of unconjectured quantity as Asiatic rains. Nor this defeat my pace, it hinder from the west, but as an enemy salute one hurrying to rest. What merit had the goal, except there intervened faint doubt and far competitor to jeopardize the gain? At last, the grace in sight. I shout unto my feet, I offer them the whole of heaven. The instant that we meet, they strive and yet delay, they perish. Do we die, or is this death's experiment reversed in victory? And then maybe you'll remember when we did 680 just recently, she said it this way: each life converges to some center, expressed or still, exists in every human nature a goal, embodied scarcely to itself, it may be too fair for credibility's presumption to mar, adored with caution as a brittle heaven to reach, where hopeless as the rainbow's raiment to touch, yet preserved toward shore for the distance how high, unto the saints' slow diligence the sky, ungained it may be by a life's low venture, but then eternity enable the endeavoring again. Now, our assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at LearnStrong.net. Down that left-hand side, Chats with Emily's our playlist. I'm hopeful that you've worked through our set of introductory comments as well as the preceding 694 poems. As we said, we just finished with 694, the heaven vests for each. Now, in this poem, you're going to have 8 lines of exploration after the word as the phrase as if, and then 1 line of a conclusion. Now, when we think about Emily and eternity, I love to go to Sharon Leiter's observations here, the great scholar. Quote, Emily Dickinson strove for an understanding of eternity all her life, exploring in poem after poem the vast mystery outside time that she sometimes envisioned as preceding the earthly span. For example, in 721, behind me dips eternity, while at other times succeeding it. For example, poem 712, because I could not stop for death. While this poem that we will be studying ostensibly arrives at a definition of the mystery, its emphasis is not on conclusion, but on the ungraspable vastness of a process that simply goes on and on. If this is Dickinson's vision of the endpoint towards which existence is moving, it is a vision not of content, but process. And I think, as I've said to you guys before, so much of Emily's work has those famous epics, from, of course, the Homeric epics of the Iliad and the Odyssey, to obviously Dante and his Divine Commedia. The idea of moving towards somewhere, the Odyssey, the journey. It is far more important, the journey, than the actual destination itself. I want you to as well pay attention in this poem to all of the biblical echoes that will be here. And I want you to pay attention to the tone of this poem. There's 2 different ways to read this poem about eternity. When you meet this idea of eternity, what is it that Keats says in Ode on a Grecian Urn does tease us out of thought, cold, pastoral? The idea that sometimes when we think about eternity, it can lead to despair, and other times to acceleration and excitement. Let's see where you guys fall on it. As if the sea should part and show a further sea, and that a further, and the three, but a presumption be of periods of seas, unvisited of shores, themselves the verge of seas to be. Eternity is those. Now, of course, some of you will say, no. It would be eternity is these to rhyme with seas and be and all these long E sounds that we're hearing throughout the poem. The fact that Emily intentionally disrupts her rhythms with this last word of those suggests that Emily is having a bit of fun with us as well, challenging us to not get into too prosaic a way of thinking about these topics. Notice she'll begin with as if. The sea should part. And again, all these long E's we see here at C, 3, B, eternity. Brilliant, right? As the parting of the Red Sea comes to mind, her reading of the King James Bible, of course, from Exodus 14, 21, 22, I think is part of this background here. Think about it. She says, as the sea parts, she says, what do you see? But rather a further or another sea. And then beyond that, a further sea. And then all of a sudden you have three, but notice three capitalized. So here playing maybe with the idea of the Trinity itself, but a presumption be, there's more coming. In other words, there's always more sea, of periods of sea. Now, it is interesting that she uses the word periods, kind of like epochs of a type. In other words, she seems to be suggesting that if you think about the sea and you think about history and you think about your life, all of those three are similar in what regards? There's always more to come. There's always something else out in front. Always something more to come, right? Of periods of seas. Now, one scholar has pointed out that this seas here sounds a whole lot like the word seals. And Emily's favorite book was the book of Revelation. And chapter 6 through 8 of Revelation is, of course, the famous 7 seals. So it may be that she's playing around with this almost like subconsciously or unconsciously of periods of seas unvisited of shores. And I think that the key word of the poem is unvisited. As we've said, so many Emily poems hinge, fulcrum, around just a single word. And it may be this word, unvisited of shores. And immediately we find ourselves thinking about what? The Odyssey. We can't help but think about Tennyson's Ulysses. I'm part of all that I have met, yet all experiences an arch where through gleams that untraveled world is margin fades forever and forever when I move. How dull it is to pause, to make an end, to rest unburnished, not to shine in use. As though to breathe were life. Life piled on life for all too little, and of one to me little remains. But every hour saved from that eternal silence, something more, a bringer, new things. And violet were for some 3 suns to store and hoard myself. And this gray spirit, yearning and desire to follow knowledge like a sinking star beyond the utmost bounds of human thought. That idea, I think, is the idea that Emily's playing with here. So many things are unvisited yet, she says. This coming from a person. Can we just blow our minds with this realization? This coming from a person who spent most of her adult life living in her father's house and predominantly in her own bedroom, where she wrote these majestic poems of travel. Maybe Keats's Chapman's Homer comes to mind. Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen. She says, of periods of seas unvisited of shores, themselves the verge of seas to be. In other words, we're always right on the edge of the next thing, what she will call in the next poem, acres of perhaps, maybe one of the greatest lines Emily ever wrote. And then after those lines of 8, then she'll tell us, definition poem, what she's been talking about. What have you been talking about with this word picture of seas upon seas upon seas? And she says, oh, that's eternity. But instead of saying eternity is these, she will say simply, eternity is those. Now, when we get to poem 712, and it will be fun for us to do this study, when we get to poem 712, we'll come back to remind ourselves the way in which Emily plays this game. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. Notice even in death there's a journey that she's excited to take. The carriage held but just ourselves in immortality. We slowly drove, he knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school. Notice this is almost like waves of the sea. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of grazing grain. We passed the setting sun, or rather, he passed us, The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer, my gown, my tippet only tulle. We paused before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. Again, this word swelling, think about the wave, the undulation of wave. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice and the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were toward eternity. And then when we get to poem 721, we'll play the game a little different from there. Behind me dips eternity. Before me immortality. Myself the term between. Death but the drift of eastern gray, dissolving into dawn away before the west began. 'Tis kingdoms afterwards, they say, in perfect pauseless monarchy, whose prince is son of none, himself his dateless dynasty, himself diversity, in duplicate divine. 'Tis miracle before me then, 'tis miracle behind, between, a crescent in the sea, with midnight to the north of her, and midnight to the south of her, and maelstrom in the sky. Well, what are we going to do with a poem like this at 2A? One scholar has said it this way: life is about dynamic endeavor, not static condition. And that's the idea, I think, is that everything goes onward and outward, nothing collapses, to quote, of course, our contemporary. At 2B, well, I love that this poem is a single sentence, right? Go back and look at it. And all the sounds. I mean, it's a wonderful poem to read aloud. I hope you guys will practice it. At 3A, speaking, of course, of Emily's contemporary, Walt Whitman. I mean, we did a full series called Talks with Walt. This Chats with Emily, Talks with Walt, where we did every single poem in Whitman's Leaves of Grass Deathbed Edition, 1892 edition. And just go back and read Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking, and then read this poem and be absolutely stunned that these two poets lived together at the same time and never apparently knew each other's work. Maybe Emily knew about Whitman and had said something derogatory about him because obviously it was Leaves of Grass. But man, to think that Walt Whitman wrote Out of the Cradle Endlessly Rocking and didn't know a poem like this. Amazing. And of course, all of the journey motifs. I mean, not just in the biblical corpus, but in all of the major classical texts that Emily would have grown up with. How many of those are built around the idea of the journey, the Odyssey? Finally, at 2B, how do you think about eternity? And to what degree are you teased, as Keats called it in Ode on a Grecian Urn? Thank you.